Hello, beautiful souls, and welcome back to Beyond the Mind with Ani. Today, we're going to explore a chapter of human history that has shaped the world and our lives in ways many of us barely notice. We're going to talk about the birth of patriarchy. How did it begin? Why does it persist, even in societies where women seem free? And most importantly, how can we recognize it and begin to dismantle it? Because patriarchy isn't just about laws or traditions, it's about stories, beliefs, and invisible systems that tell us who we are allowed to be. And these systems run so deep that many of us mistake them for nature. Think about this. Why do we assume that men are naturally better leaders while women are often praised more for the beauty and nurturing? Why is a man admired for being ambitious while a woman with the same drive is called too much? Why do so many cultures still measure a woman's worth by her role as a wife or mother, even if she achieves extraordinary things elsewhere? These aren't coincidences. They are remnants of a system designed thousands of years ago. Let's take a look back. Before agriculture, men and women worked side by side in hunter-gatherer communities. Evidence from anthropological studies showed that women contributed as much, if not more, to the group's survival. In fact, in many societies, women's knowledge of plants, healing, and food distribution was central to life. But when permanent settlement began, ownership became everything: land, livestock, inheritance, resources that could be controlled, bought, or passed on. And once wealth could not be stored, the question of who gets to inherit became critical. Suddenly, women's bodies and choices weren't just personal, they were tied to family legacies, property, and lineage. So the rules shifted. Male dominance became celebrated, and female autonomy became dangerous. And that's where the story begins, not with women being weak, but with power being redirected and systems being built to keep it in men's hands. Now, imagine a time when humans lived as hunters and gatherers. For tens and thousands of years, survival wasn't about ownership. It was about mobility. It was about cooperation and shared contribution. Archaeologists studying hunter-gatherer societies like the Kum people of the Kalahari Desert showed us that women gathered plants, fruits, and roots that often made up the majority of the food supply, while men hunted. Both roles were equally essential. Power and status wasn't measured in possession, but in how well you could contribute to the group's survival. In many of these communities, evidence suggests that decision-making was more egalitarian. For example, the Hadza of Tanzania still maintain practices where men and women share influence, and wealth cannot really be accumulated because life is mobile and resources are consumed immediately. In that world, there was little room for rigid hierarchies, but then everything changed. So around 10,000 years ago, humanity entered what we call the Neolithic Revolution. People discovered farming. They began to cultivate land, domesticate animals, and settle in one place. With agriculture came permanence, and villages, towns, and eventually civilizations were built. Suddenly, survival wasn't about what we could gather today. It was about land, livestock, and stored resources. Wealth could now be accumulated, inherited, and defended. And that shifted the balance of power. Men's role in defense, conquest, and physical labor gained prestige because land had to be protected from outsiders and worked on intensively. Women, once central in food gathering and community life, began to be viewed through a different lens. Their influence didn't vanish because of weakness, but because of new obsession, controlling inheritance and lineage. If wealth was now passed down, societies wanted to know exactly who the legitimate heirs were, which meant controlling women's sexuality, ensuring that paternity became the foundation of property rights, family dynasties, and social order. In Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization, this shift is clear. Clay tablets from ancient Sumer, dating back to over 4,000 years ago, describe laws and customs that limited women's freedom in marriage, property ownership, and sexuality. The Code of Hammurabi, one of the earliest known laws, contains strict rules about wives, fidelity, and inheritance, all tied to protecting male lineage and property. So the rules changed. Once survival depended on mobility and cooperation, then the game changed, and so did the rules. The age of ownership had begun, and with that, the long shadow of patriarchy. Before patriarchy, women were central. Power wasn't measured by conquest or dominance. It was measured by creation, connectivity, and wisdom. Women were the keepers of life, the mediators between the seen and unseen, the holders of knowledge that determined the survival of their communities. To forget this is to forget the original blueprint of human society. Wisdom is power, and women held it. From childbirth to herbal medicine, from midwifery to storytelling, women carried a knowledge of life and death. A patriarchal system feared this. Practical, sacred authority. It was invisible, yet uncontainable. The fear wasn't their strength, it was their knowledge. Female intuition is real power. A woman's ability to sense patterns, to feel energy, to anticipate outcome was once revered as divine. Oracle, priestesses, and seers shaped the decision of kings and empires. Intuition wasn't soft, it was the pulse of survival and strategy. Menstrual cycles aligned with the moon. Birth rituals mirrored cosmic creation, and women's bodies were sacred portals between life and death. Patriarchy's first theft wasn't land or gold, it was the body itself, reframing menstruation as shameful, childbirth as silent, and feminine divinity as a story of sin or submission. Then witch hunts, religious edicts, myth of Eve and Lilith, cultural shaming for women's desire. These were strategies to contain what could not be controlled. Patriarchy feared unpredictability, fluidity, and life-giving force. Women hold power in rhythm, moon cycles, season, emotional intelligence, creation. System built on linear logic cannot measure this, and yet it is the same energy that nurtures innovation, leadership, and community resilience today. Also, rewriting history was essential for control. By erasing goddesses, demonizing Lilith, idealizing Mary, and criminalizing women's knowledge, patriarchy turning living power into myth, ritual into fear, and freedom into restriction. Every story was a tool to contain the uncontrollable feminine force. Suppression never erased it. Despite centuries of control, the memory of feminine authority persists in intuition, creativity, and emotional depth. Relational intelligence and the cycle we still feel within us. Female power is not gone. It is waiting to be remembered, reclaimed, and integrated. And while feminine energy flows, it's the most potent when paired with conscious boundaries, a protective armor that allows soft, intuitive power to shine without being control and societal expectation. The feminine is revolutionary. It is not just about tenderness or receptivity. It's about life, insight, creation, cyclical wisdom. To reclaim it is to challenge domination and disconnection. It is personal, social, and spiritual revolution rooted in remembering that power is not domination, but it's integration. As society shifted from cooperation to ownership, so did the stories people told about the world. Myth wasn't just entertainment or spiritual guidance, it was social programming. It carried the values, fears, and rules of the society that created it. And in patriarchal system, myths were rewritten to justify male domination. Think about the biblical story of Eve. She is remembered not as a co creator of life, but as the one who brought sin into the world. Her act of curiosity, seeking knowledge, became the ultimate warning to women. Your independence leads to downfall. Adam sinned, but it was Eve who was blamed. That story alone shaped centuries of Christian Western thought about women as morally weaker and more susceptible to temptation and in need of male authority. And then there was Lilith, a figure from Jewish mythology. In older traditions, Lilith was said to be Adam's first wife, created equal to him, but she refused to submit, insisting on equality in the relationship. For this rebellion, she was demonized, literally cast out of Eden, and labeled as a demonic, dangerous woman, the one who defies male authority. Imagine the cultural message: independence makes you monstrous. This wasn't unique to Judeo-Christian tradition. Across civilization, powerful female figures were systematically diminished. In ancient Mesopotamia, goddesses like Inanna were worshipped as deities of love, fertility, and war. She embodied both creation and destruction, but over time her power was overshadowed by male gods like Marduk, who came to symbolize order, kingdom, kingship, and control. In Greek mythology, we see similar patterns. Gaia, the Mother Earth, who gave birth to the world, was gradually sidelined, while male sky gods like Zeus took the throne as supreme ruler. Even the myths of powerful goddesses like Athena show her different from other women born from Zeus's head, aligned with reason and war. She was honored only because she served patriarchal values. From the Garden of Eden to the temples of Greece, from Mesopotamian tablets to holy texts, stories carried the same message across time and places. Your power is dangerous unless it is contained. Once the myths were in place, law soon followed. What began as a story and symbol became statute and punishment. Patriarchy wasn't just preached, it was enforced. Property, inheritance, and marriage became the main tools of control. The question wasn't just about family, it was about power. Who could own? Who could inherit? Who could decide? Again and again, the answer titled towards men. In ancient Mesopotamia, the Code of Hammurabi, one of the earliest written legal system dating around 1750 BCE, codified women's subordination. A husband could divorce his wife if she was simply neglectful or unfaithful. Women's sexuality was tightly policed. Adultery by wife could mean death, while a man's infidelity carried little to no punishment. In ancient Athens, often celebrated as the birthplace of democracy, women had no political rights. They were legally under the guardianship of a male relative, father, husband, or even son. They could not own property independently, and their role was confined to the private household. The so-called cradle of Western civilization was for women a cage. In Rome, laws such as patria potestas, the power of father, gave the male head household authority over his wife, children, and property. Women were legally minors of such Roman history, requiring a male guardian to represent them. Their value was often reduced to their dowry, which transferred wealth between men through marriage. And then came religious laws, which amplified these controls. In early Hebrew law, women were considered property of their fathers until marriage, at which point they became the property of their husband. Virginity was tied directly to family's honor. If a woman was found not to be virgin on her wedding night, she could be stoned to death. Even in later Christian Europe, the church enforced female obedience. The concept of coverture in English common law meant that upon marriage, a woman's legal identity was absorbed into her husband. She could not own property, sign contracts, or control her own wages. The very phrase was husband and wife are one person in law, and that person is the husband. It wasn't just law, it was culture. Customs like dowries tied women's values to money and property. Chastity laws linked women's worth to her sexual purity, punishing deviations with social shame or even violence. Prohibitions of female land ownership kept wealth firmly in male hand. Every rule, every ritual, every legal clause whispered the same message. Your power has limits. Your choices are constrained. Obedience wasn't virtue, it was survival, because for many women, stepping outside these boundaries meant not just rejection, but punishment, exile, or death. On the surface, it may seem that patriarchy is fading. Women today can vote, own property, working and even run countries. Yet, beneath this progress lies a subtler, more insidious form of control, the illusion of empowerment. Patriarchy has evolved. It doesn't need chains or cages. Instead, it thrives through expectation, cultural narratives, and invisible rules. Take the example of superwoman archetype. Women are told they can have it all: a thriving career, perfect family, an unshakable appearance of beauty and youth. But this promise often comes with impossible standards. Career success without sacrificing femininity, motherhood without ever appearing tired, beauty without aging, freedom so long as it aligns with the marketable image of a woman who is strong but never threatening. Advertising and media fuel this illusion. Beauty campaigns may tell women you are beautiful as you are, but the beauty industry remains a $1 trillion empire profiting off women's insecurities. Social media offers a stage for self-expression, yet platforms like Instagram are infamous for amplifying unrealistic body standards and linking women's value to their appearance. Even in workplaces, the double bind persists. A man who is assertive is a leader, but a woman who is assertive is often called bossy or cold. A woman who embraces motherhood may be seen as less ambitious, while one who doesn't called selfish or incomplete. Sociologists call this the choice paradox, where women appear to have freedom but are subtly punished for whichever path they choose. This is why patriarchy today doesn't always chain women physically, it chains perception. It tells women that empowerment must still fit within carefully drawn boundaries: marriage, motherhood, or individual achievement. Step outside those narratives and society has labels: difficult, bitter, lost, too much. Real empowerment then isn't simply about access, it's about dismantling the invisible scripts that define what women are supposed to do with that access. The most powerful systems don't just govern through laws, they govern through the mind. Patriarchy isn't only enforced by courts, religious, or governments, it steps into psychology. shaping how men and women see themselves and each other. From childhood, girls are taught that being good often means being quiet, accommodating, or pleasing. Boys are told strength means dominance, not vulnerability. These lessons may sound harmless on the surface, but they establish the foundation for inequality. When repeated over years, they become what sociologists call the internalized oppression, where the dominated group unconsciously upholds the very system that limits them. Take the classic good girl narrative. A woman who questions too much risks being called or seen aggressive. A girl who is ambitious may be labeled as bossy, while a boy with the same traits is praised as a future leader. These subtle cues shape identity. Over time, inequality doesn't even feel imposed, it feels natural. And psychologists like Carol Gilligan have shown how women often internalize self blame when facing inequality, believing that they have personally failed rather than recognizing systemic barriers. This creates what researchers call a psychological wage gap, the hidden emotional toll of consistently adjusting, performing, or self censoring just to fit into roles societies accept. Media and culture reinforces this daily. Think of Disney princesses waiting for rescue, rom-coms portraying women as incomplete without romance, or advertisements suggesting beauty is a woman's greatest asset. Even when women succeed in politics or business, the media often comments on their appearance, clothes, and their tone of voice, reminding them subtly that their true value is their beauty. And here's the deepest layer. Once these beliefs are internalized, the system no longer needs to please women as harshly. Women please themselves. They silence their own anger, doubt, and their own worth and strives for impossible ideals. Men, too, please themselves by rejecting vulnerability, empathy, or partnership in order to maintain the illusion of strength. This is the genius of patriarchy. It convinces us that inequality isn't systemic, but personal. That failure isn't the system failing us, it's us failing the system. And here's the truth that we need to hold on to. Patriarchy was not inevitable. It wasn't destiny. It was built. And because it was built, it can also be dismantled. The danger of forgetting this, that we mistake social construct for natural law. We start believing inequality is just the way things are, rather than the result of centuries of choices, stories, and systems. But history shows us otherwise. Women were once priestesses, healers, leaders of clans. Entire culture placed women at the center of governance and decision making. Patriarchy rose through specific historical shift, and what is made by humans can be unmade by humans. The real rebellion, then, isn't just about personal empowerment. Yes, self-love, confidence, and ambition matters, but the deeper revolution is awareness. It's seeing the invisible scaffolding that shapes our decisions, fears, and roles. Why do so many women still feel guilty for prioritizing careers over motherhood, or for not wanting children at all? Why do men still feel shame when they express softness, care, or emotional vulnerability? These are not personal failings. They are echoes of a system that taught us what normal should look like. Awareness allows us to question this script. It opens the door to reclaim autonomy, not just as individuals, but as communities. And it forces us to redefine what power looks like. Power doesn't have to mean domination. It can mean cooperation, empathy, and balance. The most revolutionary act is often the simplest, to recognize the cage for what it is, because once we see it clearly, we are no longer bound by its illusion. The system was built and it can be dismantled. So, my dears, I want to thank you for being here, and I want to thank you for questioning all this with me, for listening with me with an open heart, and for carrying this awareness into your own life. Every time we pause and reflect, every time we challenge what we have been told is natural, we loosen the grip of the system that confines us. Together, we remember that patriarchy was built, and what was built can be rebuilt. We reclaim the right to imagine differently, to live differently, and to love differently. And the most powerful change begins not in the most distant future, but in this very moment, the moment we dare to see with new eyes and choose another path forward. So until next time, stay curious, stay bold, and always go beyond the mind.